talked about this. Remember, we need to pull the fingers back to get that fat off of the radiograph. All right, so on an oblique thumb, the way we would do an oblique thumb is place, you want to pronate your hand. Remember, we want to make sure that the long axis of the thumb runs with the long axis of the cassette. The central ray is perpendicular, and we're going to center to the first MCP joint, which stands, Kylie, for what? First MCP joint, meta. David's got his hand up back here. Do you want to phone a friend? Oh, Daniel does. Daniel?
Metacarpal phalangeal joint.
Metacarpal phalangeal joint, our first MCP joint. We want to collimate down. You want to include the distal phalanx to the trapezium. Y'all remember, Madison? Do you remember what another name for that trapezium is?
Greater.
Greater multangular. That's correct.
I'm sorry, what?
From the distal phalanx to the trapezium,
Oh,
which is
okay.
also known as the greater multangular.
Got it, thanks.
So look up here at your radiographs. You can tell when it's an oblique because you'll look at this proximal phalanx. Do you see how there is more concavity on one portion and the other side is straighter? Distal phalanx, you have to include all of the trapezium on here. The one thing that we want to make sure that we do is that the long axis of that thumb is running with the long axis of our exposed area. The other thing, I want you to look at the difference. We want to slightly separate the thumb from the other digits because look here at this. Do you see this fat pattern right here? Do you see this extra soft tissue that's overlapping the base of the phalange? Separate those fingers a little bit so that you're pulling that tissue away from it being superimposed on the bone. You know, don't keep the fingers close together. We talked about last week making a hitchhiker, you know, like we're hitchhiking, really getting that thumb extended away from this area. So when you're critiquing these radiographs, make a notation that you want to really look at that soft tissue to make sure there's no overlap on the radiograph. What's wrong with the positioning of this oblique thumb?
It's not running the long axis of the thumb.
Nope, it's running with the long axis of that exposed area right there. Look at your thumbnail. We talked about when you do a lateral thumb in lab last week that you want the thumbnail to be perpendicular to the image receptor, correct? On an oblique thumb, when you pronate your hand, how's your thumb?
45
Now,
45 degree
it's at a 45-degree angle, but up here, you got to be real careful not to let your patient rotate that thumb on up to where the thumbnail is perpendicular to the image receptor. Make sure that it's at a 45-degree oblique.
So it's not rotated enough?
It's over-rotated.
It's over-rotated.
It's over-rotated. So everybody give them an answer to this question before let's not shout anything out. So is this a good radiograph? So go through your 4 choices. How many of you think it's A? B? C?
Oh.
How about D? There, the majority wins. It is D.
Could it not be 2B as well?
Trapezium's clipped.
No. The trapezium is clipped, so that's our main thing that's wrong with it. The rotation, we know that it's not over-rotated, placing it into a lateral position because the base, look up here at the base. Here's an edge and here's an edge. If it's over-rotated and they're in a lateral where the thumbnail's perpendicular, those two areas would be superimposed on top of each other. We know that it's not under-rotated. If it's under-rotated, it's going to be more of a PA or an AP, correct? So you would have equal concavity of the phalanx. you can look right here, we're straight and we have a concavity, so we know that they're rotated the way they're supposed to be. So then we're looking at the trapezium being clipped.
And you need all of it.
We need all of it.
Got it.
We just needed to call them out.
We just needed to call them yes. And another thing that's really wrong with it, if they would have positioned it properly on the radiograph, do you see how it's running a little bit diagonal on the radiograph? If the long axis of the thumb was running with the long axis of the exposed field, then they wouldn't have clipped the anatomy. Do you see, Sharon?
So if I'm critiquing this on your test, would I just say anatomy clipped?
You would say anatomy is clipped.
I wouldn't mention that it's diagonal?
You could, and it's not gonna be incorrect, no.
Okay.
And you could say anatomy clipped because it's not running properly. Because that's really not due to collimation. When you really sit down here and look at it, it's really due to poor positioning.
So if it's not positioned right, there'll be concavity on both sides?
That's if it's under rotated.
If it is under rotated, you'll have concavity that's equal on both sides. Yes. We really don't have to worry about this slide anymore because we only are doing one-on-one. We talked about last week in lab, we only do the one-on-one so that the computer now reads the very center of it. But if you go somewhere and you're having to do 2 images on one radiograph, or 3 images, since we're doing 3 on this thumb, we always want the anterior part of your finger to run off the edge of the cassette. So, meaning, look up here at this one. Here's the anterior portion of my thumb. It is pointed towards the other, where the other projection would be, correct? If I was doing 2 on 1, which would be incorrect. So the anterior portion of the thumb should always be to the edge of my cassette. So you might just make a little note of that. So let's look at these lateral projections of our thumb. The one thing that you're going to have when you're doing a lateral projection of your thumb is the thumbnail should be perpendicular. The metatarsal head, or not metatarsal head, I'm sorry, the phalangeal head should be superimposed on top of each other. Now one may look a little bit larger because of magnification, but there should be the rotation, there should be no rotation of the phalangeal head. And you should include from the distal tip, and go ahead and include the soft tissue to all of the trapezium. So this radiograph, the first one on your left is good. The second one, how could we have improved this radiograph? Do you see anything? I know it's kind of a crappy
Separate 'em.
Separate it more.
You see this fat tissue here is over that base. You need to extend that finger to get that tissue out of the way. But then let's look at this third one. This is the one I really want you to compare. There's a couple of things wrong with it. Morgan, can you tell me one thing that's wrong with it?
Is it not straight up and down?
That's one thing. It's not straight on my cassette. I don't have the longitudinal axis of the thumb running with the longitudinal axis of that exposed area. Daniel, what's the other?
Trapezium's clipped.
The trapezium's clipped. So that's 2. There's a third one. Look up here at the heads. I told you earlier they should be superimposed. Look here. When you see one edge here and one edge here, do you see the rotation? They should be relatively on top of each other,
So
like this right here. Like here. They have over-rotated that, yes. You are not going to have to tell me if it's over or under rotated. You just have to tell me that it's rotated, okay? So let's not spend a lot of time worrying about if it's over or under. You're just gonna have to tell me rotation. So you see that where the metatarsal, the phalangeal head is not superimposed. Okay. Let's forget your choices A through D. What is wrong with this radiograph of the thumb? Because you're not gonna have choices like that on your test. What is wrong with this radiograph of this thumb? It is rotated. That is correct. So now let's critique. These are all three images of our thumb. So let's start with our lateral, and let's walk through the steps of what we need to do. Is my anatomy included? So do I have from the distal tip to the trapezium?
Yes.
Is the long axis of the thumb running with the long axis of the image?
Yes.
And is it rotated properly? Is the phalangeal heads superimposed on top of each other? Yes. Is my thumb extended to where I have tissue away from the base of that phalange?
No.
No, because you can, I forgot my pointer. You can see right here where it's going and superimposing right there over the tip. So we want to extend that out and get that out of the way. So let's look at the next image. It's my oblique. Is it a good radiograph? Sharon, what's the first thing that's wrong you see that's wrong with it?
Anatomy.
Anatomy. I just have the joint right here. I don't have all the trapezium, so that has to be included. So anatomy is clipped. The other thing I want to see, is it at a 45-degree oblique? And the easiest way for me to look at it is I look at the distal phalange. Does the distal phalange look like it's in a lateral position? Does it look like the thumbnail is perpendicular, or were they rotated 45 degrees?
It's not perpendicular.
It's not supposed to be perpendicular, but this image is showing that it is. Look up here, let's go back to the oblique. Look how the phalange, the distal phalanx is supposed to be. Here's one edge and here's one edge. They're kind of separated. They're 45 degrees to each other, right? Now let's go back. That looks perfectly lateral to me.
We're on 22, I thought.
That looks perfectly lateral to me. Do you see how they're kind of lined up right here?
So it's over rotated.
So they over-rotated. If they let the thumb go into a lateral position, yes. And then the AP, I see a couple of things wrong with the AP.
Anatomy.
You see a common problem with the thumb, anatomy's being clipped. So make sure you open your collimation up. The other problem that we see with this is, remember on the AP, you're gonna have equal concavity of your phalanx. Is this equal to this?
No.
The side, which way is it rotated? We talked about this last week in class. The side of the thumb with the most soft tissue is the side closest to the film. So they have over-rotated. They've over-rotated this.
So, to say that on your test, they've over-rotated, and you're rotating it
Internally.
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 Okay.
Can we just say rotated?
Unless I specifically ask, yes.
Oh.
Yes. All right, let's go through these real quick, because you already have your notes from what we did in lab last week. So, for fingers, we do 3 projections. We do a PA oblique, and a lateral. For the PA projections of the finger, you pronate the hand, extend the fingers. Remember, the fingers have to be parallel to the image. The central ray is perpendicular, and what was the centering point for the fingers? The PIP joint of that affected digit. PIP, Alicia, stands for what?
happy is your phalangeal
Your
interphalangeal. Proximal interphalangeal joint.
proximal interphalangeal joint, these knuckles right here. So that's my centering point. The key, remember, to a good finger is to keep it parallel to the image receptor. When we're critiquing this, you want to have from the distal phalanx to at least half of the metacarpal. That's the minimum you have to have. Remember last week in lab we talked about, go ahead and open it up. It's okay to include the entire metacarpal. This is incorrect because look, we've collimated, this is just the head that's partially collimated off. So they need to repeat this and open that collimator up to expose more of an area for them to see. On your test, you're going to have a finger and you're going to have to be able to tell me which digit it is. So if I ask you what is the proper centering point for this radiograph, then you're going to have to be able to look at it and tell me which finger it is.
Is that the third PIP?
The way we can tell is you can look at your metacarpals. We know that the third metacarpal is the longest. So we can see that this metacarpal is a little bit more distal than this one. So we know this is our third. Well, this one plus is marked 4. Is one way you can tell.
I didn't even
But
see
it's
it.
not going to be like that on your test. But you can tell by looking at the anatomy. You have to look at your metacarpals. We know that our fifth is the shortest. So you have to be able to look at that radiograph. And we're going to do a lot of that next week. So we don't have to get too consumed with it today. So to critique this, distal phalanx to half the metacarpal, and then you have to look for equal concavity, or approximately equal concavity on your phalanx. For a lateral, you want to obviously have the patient extend their affected digit, pull the other digits into it, make a fist with all the other digits. It's not affected. You want to, if we're doing the index finger, what type of projection? We talked about this in lab last week. How are we going to rotate this?
Lateral,
We are
medial.
going to internally rotate it to reduce our OID, correct? We don't want to do our lateral like this and have our OID. So we're going to internally rotate it to keep the finger as
Medial,
close to the film
lateral.
as we can. These other digits are pulled back into a fist. What type of projection is that? Remember, it's how it enters and exits the body.
Medial, lateral.
So here's the medial side of my finger from anatomical position. Here's the lateral. So it is a medial lateral projection. For digits 3, 4, and 5, we are going to do a lateral medial projection. So anatomical position. So a lateral medial projection. All right, lateral medial. Lateral medial. The key when you're doing these is not to let that digit, the distal phalanx, reach down here and touch the cassette to steady it. You have to keep it parallel. And the reason we have to keep it parallel is to keep the joint spaces open. All right? We talked about last week too in lab, you can use a Q-tip to push that fourth digit out, or the fifth, or the third digit. You can use a sponge, you can use a tongue depressor, whatever is needed to get that finger away from the others. On your radiograph, you have to include distal tip, again, to half of the metacarpal, which this is clipped.
Is that a pinky?
We
What do you need
do
again?
distal phalanx to half the metacarpal is the minimum that you need to have. One other thing thing that you wanna double check is these other phalanges need to be away from that and not superimposed over the one we're looking at. Look at this one right here, up here as an example. You see how this phalanx is down here over this? Now, obviously, there's a problem. What is it? It's dislocated, isn't it? So they might not have been able to
PIP.
push that back exactly. But remember, we have perfect patients and perfect films in here, correct? And we know what you're looking at. So you would tell me that this phalanx needs to be free, this phalanx needs to be free of superimposition. Let me ask you this. Look at this right here. We want to make sure it's in a good lateral position. This is a lateral, the third digit, so the joint has to be open. Do you see that right there? That tells me, so look at the distal interphalangeal joint when you're critiquing these to make sure that the joint space is open. That tells me that your finger is parallel to the image receptor. How do I know if it's rotated properly? Look at the at the heads of the phalanges. You see here where it's superimposed on top of each other? But why is this one off? Do you see it's off just a little bit? Why do you think that is? How can this one be superimposed, but this proximal phalanx not superimposed? Any idea?
They just have messed up phalanx.
No, that is due to magnification.
How did they do that?
Because this one is farther, when you're looking at your finger, this one is a little bit farther from the cassette than this one, correct?
So it's the OIDs.
So it's the OID is gonna, so when you're critiquing this, the moral of this is do not look at the proximal phalanx. Look at the middle phalanx to check if they're rotated or not. Because the proximal phalanx is gonna have a little bit more OID and it's gonna be off just a little bit when we're critiquing things. What's wrong with this position? And again, these are those ugly fingernails. Remember what I told you a while ago to make a note of. If you're having to do more than one projection on a film, the anterior surface of your finger should be facing off of the cassette, not towards the other images. All right, so let's do our hands. So we do 3 projections, a PA, oblique, and a lateral. So for our PA projection, you're gonna pronate your hand, slightly separate your fingers. You want the long axis of your hand running with the long axis of the cassette, correct? Center raise perpendicular, we center to the 3rd MCP joint. The minimum you have to include on your radiograph is from the distal phalanx to at least 1 inch of the radius and ulna. Distal phalanx to at least 1 inch of the radius and ulna. Now then, are you able to name these carpal bones? So Maddie, Virgin, if I ask you what this carpal bone is right here, what would you tell me? That is the hamate. Maddie Porter, what is this one right here beside it? This right here. The scaphoid. What's another name for that? Elise?
Navicular?
Navicular. So you need to be able to look at your radiograph and name the anatomy if I was to point something out to you, okay? So how do we critique this? Well, it says that we want to have equal concavity of the phalanx. But sometimes that's not always the easiest. Because a lot of times, put your hand down flat. Does your fifth finger kind of curve a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever I'm critiquing these, I don't look at the fifth one at all. I'm looking at that middle phalanx, because that's the one that they're gonna be able to put flat down on the board. And I'm looking at the middle phalanx to see if there's any rotation. So they should pretty much look symmetrical. And do they on this one?
Yeah.
Yes. Do I have distal phalanx to an inch of the radius and ulna?
Yes,
Yeah.
Do I have medial and lateral margins?
yes.
Yes. Are my fingers slightly separated?
Yes.
Yes. One other thing that you need to critique when you're doing these is make sure that the third, fourth, and fifth metacarpal heads are not superimposed any. All right? There should be a space between them. One thing that we didn't mention last week, but you probably already know this. What is this?
Sesamoid?
That's a sesamoid bone. Did you know your largest sesamoid bone in your body is your patella? That is your largest. Jeez, I'm not remembering anything.
Where's that one you're talking about?
It's like on my head.
Right there.
Okay.
Let me ask you this.
Me?
Yes, you.
Okay.
What is the name of a sesamoid bone found in the posterior aspect of the knee? Just because she's smart.
I don't know that one.
Flabella. So good, I'm glad I can say something today that y'all don't know. Flabella. But we'll get there next semester. No rush. Okay, for an oblique hand, you want to pronate your hand and then rotate the hand and wrist laterally 45 degrees. The metacarpal should form a 45-degree angle. Normally, we do it like this to where we allow the digits to rest down on the cassette. But if the fingers are of primary interest, then the fingers should be kept parallel to the image receptor. So make sure you know if we're demonstrating the metacarpals, and that's what we primarily do in clinicals, is we allow the fingers to sit on the cassette. If you're looking at the digits, then they should be parallel. The central ray is perpendicular. We center to the third MCP joint, which you already have in your notes. Look at the difference up here. Can you tell me by looking at these, which one had the digits parallel and which one had the digits at an angle?
The left is parallel.
Look at your distal phalanges. Now, they're not going to be open completely, but do you see this little black line? That's the joint. That was when the fingers were parallel. Look over here. There is no black line. Do you see that where they're completely superimposed? That is when the fingers were touching the cassette. And that's how it's generally going to be. What has to be included on this? Distal phalanx to the distal radius and ulna.
So
That's
would be
missing.
The anatomy clip?
Anatomy clip.
No, we didn't say an inch, it just has to be
Oh.
distal radius and ulna
I
on
see.
the oblique.
Okay.
All right? So as long as we have, like this one right here is fine. Because you have it, because they're just looking from that joint space up. Look at this oblique over here though. This one is clipped because I don't have the ulna, do I? I only have the styloid process. So we've got to make sure that we've got all of the ulna. You can see the most distal portion of the ulna, all the way across. Did you just stretch or did you add some stretch? The other thing that you want to make sure, how do I know it was oblique 45 degrees? The distal, well, let's just say the metacarpal heads of 3, 4, and 5 will be slightly superimposed. That tells me it's 45 degrees. The metacarpal heads of 3, 4, and 5 will be slightly superimposed. All right, now let's go back. Look at your PA. On the PA, do you see how there's no superimposition of them? We want them to be separated, correct? When you oblique them, you're going to have the metacarpals the head should be slightly superimposed like this, but you should still see a space between the bodies of 3 and 4, 4 and 5. This little space right here between the body of the metacarpal should still be visible. Are y'all with me on this? The other thing that I want to make sure is that my fingers are slightly separated enough to where I don't have soft tissue superimposing the bone. So like up here, it's in the soft tissue, but it's not in the bone, so that's okay. What about this image here? This is a PA oblique. Were the digits parallel or not?
No.
No, as long as so you're able to recognize that now. Okay, so is this a good radiograph? What's wrong with it?
You don't have the joint space.
We know we are over-rotated because there's not a space between the bodies of 3 and 4. The metacarpal. See right here, for the metacarpal, there is no space between them. So that tells me they're over-rotated. Remember, this is what it should look like. So we are over-rotated, meaning they went laterally too much. This one, look at this. They didn't separate their fingers, so we have soft tissue over bone. So slightly separate those fingers. And let me ask you this, look up there at that. What is the rotation correct? Do I have slight superimposition of 3 and 4, 4 and 5?
Pushing it.
Oh, 4
You're
and
pushing
5.
it.
4 and 5 is not, so it needs to be a little bit more rotated. It's under-rotated. So they all have to be superimposed, 3 and 4, 4 and 5 heads,
So we just mark that as rotation.
under-rotated. Yeah, you'd say it's not rotated properly. For a lateral, this is a lateral hand and extension. Remember, we extend the fingers, superimpose the metacarpals and the digits on top of each other, place the thumb in what position is my thumb in?
AP.
PA. In a PA position. The center ray is perpendicular to the second MCP joint. When I'm critiquing this radiograph, I want to make sure I have distal phalanx to radius and ulna. I want to make sure that I've got all of the thumb on my film. I want to make sure that the digits are superimposed on top of each other and that the metacarpals are superimposed. Real quick. Michaela, what's number 1?
That is the,
Go into that space right there.
I can't remember.
All right, your friend next to you is going to help you out. That's you, Elise.
Oh. I don't know, that's the scaphoid and the radial, so
It
the
is known
space.
as the radial carpal joint.
Okay.
The radial carpal joint. Number 2 then is, what is it? It's pointed to that joint, Alicia.
Is that your saddle joint?
It is a saddle joint, but what is the proper name of that?
Let's see that.
What are these bones?
Carpals,
What is this bone?
your metacarpals.
So it is the
Oh.
carpal
Metacarpal joint.
Yes. Madison, number 30.
That is the metacarpal phalangeal joint.
That is the
For the
first
fifth-
metacarpal
first.
phalangeal joint, first. 4, Kyla,
First.
Distal?
Nope.
Sharon? What is that joint right there?
The first, proximal,
Morgan?
what's the name of the joint?
Remember, your thumb does not have a proximal or distal joint because there's no middle phalanx. So it is only known as the interphalangeal joint.
What?
It's not a different hip.
No, it's no different hip, it's just IP. So Jaime, what's number 5? That joint.
The metacarpal carpal joint, or no, the carpal metacarpal. No.
What is this bone right here?
That's metacarpal.
Metacarpal.
Yeah.
This is the phalange, so it is the second metacarpal phalangeal joint. David, number 6?
The second. Proximal interphalangeal joint.
The second proximal interphalangeal joint. So then we know that 7 then is the distal interphalangeal joint. Yes. Good. All right, for a wrist. We do a PA, oblique, and a lateral. For the PA projection of the wrist, remember we said we want to make a fist, and why do we want to make a fist?
Level.
To reduce the OID and to place the carpals at a better angle to the film. They're more parallel to the film. So you make a fist. We want to make sure that the radius and ulna is running with the longitudinal axis of our cassette. The central ray is perpendicular. We center to the mid-carpals. The minimum that you have to have on your radiograph is the half of the metacarpal and a fourth of the radius and ulna. That's the minimum. We prefer a little bit more than that, but that's the minimum you have to have.
How much radius and ulna did you say half?
A minimum of a fourth. On the wrist, our hand is again in a fist and it's pronated. Rotate it laterally 45 degrees. We center to the mid-carpals again. And you are going to, again, include the same anatomy. Half of the metacarpals to at least a fourth of the radius and ulna. Look up here at this radiograph. So, which carpals do you think is best demonstrated on this? Well, which carpal is this? The scaphoid, and then what is this? The trapezium. Next week, we're going to look at when we critique these radiographs, you're going to be able to see a joint space. To tell if it's a 45-degree oblique, there should be a joint space. It won't be complete, but you should see just a little bit of a space between the trapezium and the trapezoid. That's how I'm going to tell if it's 45 degrees. You'll have just a little bit of a joint, but you will not see it all the way down. And then on the radius and ulna, again, we extend the arm. We're going to do a lateral medial projection. You want to make sure that the radius and ulna are superimposed on top of each other. Central ray is perpendicular, center mid-carpals. Same anatomy is included. The only difference is, look up here at this radiograph. When I critique these, my goal is to get the radius and the ulna on top of each other. If you see the ulna free of superimposition, any portion of it, and I'm talking distally, okay, because they will begin to separate as we move up the arm. But let's say the distal inch, 2 inches is what you're looking at. Remember, the smaller of the two bones is the ulna. Do y'all see where the ulna is located? Here's the ulna right here, one edge, and here's the other. Do you see it overlapping the radius? You're gonna have to tell me how to correct it. So if the radius, so how do you think, put your arm out there. So the radius is anterior to the ulna. So how will they rotate it? Take your radius in front of your ulna. So turn your wrist in just a little bit. So you can actually feel this. You can feel your radius on your thumb side. You can feel your ulna. So when you rotate, you can feel your radius going in front, correct? If you rotate the other way, you can tell your radius is going behind it. So on this radiograph, we need to roll that wrist which direction?
Back.
Back. Laterally. However you want to say it. Back or forward works, or lateral or medial works also. You can say external or internal. It's the same. That'd be the same principle, yeah. I like back and forward.
Yeah.
But I need to rotate it back. I need to take the radius back onto the ulna. Are y'all all see that? On this radiograph, do I have half the metacarpals? Do I have at least a fourth of the radius and ulna? It's good. That's all you have to worry about on TA. Isn't that easy?
But,
Too easy. Half the metacarpals are included, a fourth of the radius and ulna. I've got the medial and the lateral sides of the wrist, right? So that's all I have to worry about, guys. On the oblique, do I have half the metacarpals? I have a little bit over half, don't I? Do I have a fourth of the radius and ulna? I have more than that, don't I? So now I have to determine, is it a good 45-degree oblique? You cannot look at your metacarpals like we do on a hand because of the divergency of that beam we talked about the other day. You have to look at the trapezium. Do you see just a small portion of a joint between the trapezium and the trapezoid? You see that little black speck right there? That's a joint. It's not going to be completely open. There'll be just a small little space. So that tells me that yes, it was 45 degrees.
Just that little tiny space.
Just a little tiny space, a little tiny part of the joint is all I'm looking for.
So that's
When
good.
I'm lateral, do I have half the metacarpals on this one? I have all of them, don't I? I even have a portion of the phalange. Do I have anterior and posterior sides of the carpal? Yes. Do I have a fourth of the radius and ulna? So then that is included. Perfect patient, perfect film. So what do I need to do with it? Here's the radius, here's the ulna. Ulna is a little bit posterior. scaphoid kind of sits like this in your body. It kind of curves around, so if you're looking straight on, this is kind of superimposed over this right here. But what that angle does is a 20-degree angle, and it places it like at right angles to the scaphoid, allowing us to look at how much longer it appears up here than the previous radiograph we've looked at. That way, because it's getting rid of this being superimposed underneath it. It's angling right towards that, straightening that out. Alright? There's Jody, if y'all not met Jody, she's on ultrasound. Anyway, we talked, this is the Clements Nakayama. Remember, we put it on that 45-degree angle sun, Ulnar deviate. Send it to the snuff box, you'll have all of that on your notes, right? We angle 45 degrees distally because it's going towards the distal tip. And what we're looking at on this is done to demonstrate the trapezium, make sure you put that down, and the first carpal metacarpal joint. Another thing that's demonstrated is the joint space between the trapezium and the trapezoid. The trapezium and the trapezoid, that joint space between them. Between the trapezium and the trapezoid. The Gainer heart, we had a couple of names for that last week, didn't we? The Gainer heart, the carpal tunnel, or that inferior superior. Remember, we wanted to get to hyperextend the fingers until the metacarpals formed how many degrees to the film? Our goal was to get them 90 degrees, but that was hard to do, wasn't it? And you angle 25 to 30 degrees to the long axis of the hand. Remember, 25 degrees if they could get it vertical. 30 degrees we talked about if there was an angle they couldn't get it straight up. That's where that range comes into play. We've already talked about the centering point being an inch distant to the base of the third metacarpal. This is done to demonstrate, look at the radiograph. This is done to demonstrate this carpal tunnel, this canal right here. It demonstrates, what is this one right here? Y'all know what this? The pisiform. It's going to demonstrate the pisiform free of superimposition. It's going to demonstrate the hook of the hamate. You see the hook of this hamate right here? And it demonstrates the palmar aspect of the trapezium, the scaphoid, the capitate, and the triquetral. Demonstrates the palmar aspect of the trapezium, the scaphoid, the capitate, and the triquetral. Yes?
Is the hook of the hamate also the hamulus?
Yes.
Okay.
Alright. This tangential, I don't think I gave you that when we talked about carpal bridge. It's considered a tangential projection. Do y'all remember from the first week of school what tangential means?
Skimming.
Skims apart. So when you have it up here, we're skimming the dorsal aspect of the wrist. We're just kind of clipping that right there. And you can kind of see that with this. But remember we said that the forearm and the hand form at least a 90-degree angle to each other. 45 degrees caudal, remember, because they were standing up and it's going towards their feet. Then because their body's in an anatomical position. An inch and a half above the wrist. But look what's demonstrated. Here's the carpal bridge. It demonstrates the dorsal aspect. What's dorsal mean?
Back.
Posterior. It demonstrates the dorsal aspect of the scaphoid, the lunate, the triquetral. Those three, and you can see see a little bit of the capitate too. You can go ahead and put that down too. But you can see that dorsal aspect of them. All right, so Monday, put down that we're gonna start on slide 10. We're gonna cover these real quick, and then we'll have time to get to our other PowerPoint then. I'm glad we did what we did in lab last week. All right?